First question I'm going to start off this conversation with is, what was it for you that brought you into or built that connection for you to focus professionally on mental health and specifically mental wealth? What was it that drove you? I know Francesca, you got a chance to share your story a little bit. I know Phil, you talked a little bit about your experience. But for our other panelists, what was it that brought this topic to the forefront in terms of your work? And this is for anybody who wants to go first, and then I'll start calling. Lily.
So mostly I'm a researcher. I do research on PTSD and suicide prevention. And I think what really drove me in terms of my interest and passion in that area, my father was a Vietnam veteran. He passed away in 2016, right before I got my PhD. And he was a driving force behind my interest in understanding the effects of trauma and how it can affect a person's day-to-day experiences. I remember a few months before he passed away, we were talking a little bit about his experiences in the war, and he got up in the middle of the conversation, had to leave the room. 50 years after Vietnam, it was still with him to that day. He inspired me. He was a complicated person. I miss him dearly, but he was really a driving force behind why I decided to do what I do.
Come on.
Just make me go next.
Yeah.
No worries. So I used to teach for about 5 years at 2 different schools, 2 different groups of young people from 2 different neighborhoods, right? And there was a through line that I saw with the young black boys that I taught, and that was they were regularly labeled as unintelligent, or IEPs, couldn't perform, not smart, whatever, right? And I am not a typical teacher, right? I didn't go to school for education. I ended up teaching because I taught video production, and the 2 schools that I was working at needed somebody to do that, and there was no education degree in that area, so they let me teach it. But by spending time like one-on-one and even group time with the young black men, I noticed that they weren't actually stupid. I noticed that some of them didn't really need IEPs. What I realized is that their self-esteem was extremely low, and they didn't believe in themselves. And from spending more personal time with them, I started to figure out where that came from. Family upbringings, experiences throughout their lives. And when I started to treat and engage them like they were valuable and important, like they mattered, not only did their self-esteem increase, but so did their performance. And so I started putting 2 and 2 together here, like there's something wrong, right? And it happened at both different schools. And so I started to realize that there was something going on. I don't know if it was, at the time I didn't know if it was global, but it was going on in the city. And so as I got older, I did that when I was young, as I got older, I started engaging other black men, and I started realizing that it wasn't just in the young people, it was in the men as well. And so as an artist, I decided that was a theme or a story that I wanted to address because I personally care about that thing, right? And so my last couple of projects dealt with that subject matter. So that is what compelled me to get into this.
All right. I'm going to try to project my next question, so if y'all can't hear me, let me know. But keeping with that theme, this question is specifically for Petra and Lily. Looking at the makeup of all of us folks sitting up here, right? There's what's that old saying? One of these things is doing its own thing. One of these things is not the other, right? There's talk to us a little bit about the importance of having a cultural understanding or perspective when you're dealing with issues and talking to clients and patients and subjects around behavioral health and mental health. What are some of the similarities across socioeconomic differences, and what are some of the differences that you've seen both of your research? And this is really repetitive.
Right.
Francesca, you can jump in.
And you expect me to answer that?
I'm expecting you to just give us a
Concisely
little.
in 2 minutes.
Nope, not at all. Petra likes to talk, and I like to talk to Petra.
So I would start out by saying that to you that I'm not from the US, I'm from Germany. I got interested in psychology because of my country's history. And you probably know what happened in World War II, where we pretty much tried to exterminate an entire group of people in Germany. So I come from an oppressor culture. When I came to America, I'm very conscious that coming from a place where we, or my people, have done something very similar in some ways and in many ways different than what has happened to, let's say, African Americans here. Not a lot of black people in Germany when I grew up, actually, for numerous reasons. So it was really different for me, and I worked in a lot of people, in a lot of organizations here where my staff or my coworkers were black. I worked with people with intellectual disabilities. I didn't start out in academia. I worked direct care jobs with clients, with all this kind of stuff. So I worked with a lot of African Americans, both as co-workers, as clients. I had to educate myself about the culture. I listened to music. I discussed hip hop. I watched documentaries. I try to read up on the history here. And so I learned a lot about racial trauma and what people are going through. All the while also being quite aware that I come from a privileged situation. Just had an example the other day where a friend of mine showed me a video of somebody, of a black male at an airport being totally discriminated against and being stereotyped as an angry black man because of some dispute that occurred there. And I had to remind myself that, man, like I thought we were further along here than where we are, but apparently we're not. Apparently this shit still goes on every day, all the time. I would know about that because it doesn't really happen to me. So to end this is like, I think I use my everyday life experiences that I also have used. I'm also mainly an academic, so I don't really have a lot of clients anymore, but I teach people to be clinicians and work with people, right? Largely underserved populations. So for me, it's always like, you bring race up if there are racial differences. You talk about that with the client, what that means. You talk about people's experiences. You also don't make assumptions about your clients because there's also people that have very diverse experiences within communities. Communities aren't homogeneous either. So you have to be careful not to stereotype. You ask people about their experience. You listen to people and you try to understand where they're coming from. And you probably realize that you can't fully experientially understand what they've been through because you haven't been in that situation. But you can still help and you can still understand. And that is a lifelong learning process. And I'm giving up the microphone. I'm giving it up.
I'll just briefly add, so I'm a psychologist and our field has a history of participating in acts of oppression, and one of the ways that our field has engaged in oppression is a history of attempting to achieve what they called cultural competence, which is this idea that as a therapist you could be culturally competent in a culture that's not yours. More recently, there's been a trend toward understanding cultural humility, which is the idea that you don't know what it's like to be in another person's shoes and you need to understand by listening instead of talking. And so along those lines, I'm going to pass the mic off.
Well, before y'all bow out, because I'm going to keep your feet to the fire just a little bit, because I think it's important. Part of my job as a living is to have difficult conversations. But one of the things I think in this subject, in this conversation of racial, ethnic, and social differences, is we don't talk enough about the similarities, right? And so there are some basic human consistent needs that we're talking about when it comes to mental wealth, or mental. You normally use the term mental health. Talk to us a little bit about just some of the basic skills and needs that we need as human beings to help manage and have mental health. And Francesca, you feel free to jump in on that one, because I know you have a workbook that has some very practical steps in it.
Do I go in? This is brilliant. I love it. No, just kidding. I think all of us have similar needs that have to do with, which we talked a lot, which came up a lot in the room earlier today, and that is a need for love, a need for connection, a need to be seen, a need to be safe, maybe a need to be spiritually or religiously fulfilled. If you're not religious, maybe spirituality, and various other domains. Maybe a job that is fulfilling, contributing in some way, giving, and also receiving. And I think those are basic human needs, and they vary. They vary a little bit by culture and the importance of what is more important in what culture, but I think they're pretty global. And also we're united in suffering, right? I think we all experience clearly mental health issues, we're all experiencing various kinds of things, and so we're also united in our experience of suffering, even if they occur in different situations and for different reasons.
Anyone else?
I had this one podcast episode with this wonderful young lady, Lavna, from India. And we both came into this conversation thinking we were going to have completely different experiences and we were going to have to try to find things to connect about. And we realized that although it was being presented to us differently and it was manifesting differently, one of the big things we struggled with was wanting to be good enough, wanting to make our parents proud, wanting to be included. And I think that's so powerful. No matter where we come from, a lot of those basic needs is to want to feel like I belong, to want to feel good enough, to want to feel valued and important.
Yeah, I really like the idea of focusing on mental wealth, because sometimes when we're thinking of mental health, it implies this idea of trying to get rid of difficult negative emotions. I'm going to get mental health treatment to get rid of anxiety, to get rid of depression. And when we're thinking about mental wealth, what we're thinking about is the reality that positive emotions exist on a different spectrum than negative emotions. You can have experiences that make you incredibly sad and also really fulfilled. When we talked about the experience in our first poem of the night where to do something that's important to you, you get burned along the way. Most of the things that we care about require suffering. And to think about the things that make us really happy also make us miss people that we loved from the past. And so to think about mental health, I think, honors the reality of what are the tasks that we can do to promote positive emotions. How can we take the time to slow down and savor experiences rather than rushing through our lives like, busy maniacs like most of us do every morning? How do we slow down? How do we savor? How do we connect? I think that's what mental wealth conjures up for me.
Phil, what does mental wealth mean to you as it relates to, you talked earlier specifically about our culture as African Americans, and more specifically Black men. Talk a little bit about, you talked about the city of brotherly love, but those of us who have been in this city for a while know that we've really struggled recently dealing with a lot of trauma, dealing with a lot of pain, and dealing with hurt people hurting people. So how can we collectively get closer to mental wealth? What are some of the things that you want to do?
Well, first I would say, I would define mental wealth as this. I would say mental wealth is the accumulation and cultivation of positive mental resources that all contribute to enriching your well-being. And it is the proactive creation of a skill set, a mindset, and a heart set that allows you to build resilience and to have a skill set for well-being. And I would say this is kind of a twofold response to that question. Everyone in here, you asked the question, people of color, white women, different ethnicities. We are all formed beings, all of us in this space. Doesn't matter whether you're male, female, straight, queer, black, white, we're all formed beings. We're either malformed, deformed, conformed, or transformed. And I had two black parents from the South, Oklahoma and Arkansas, respectively. And my father was in the military, his father was in the military, his father was in the military. So we were raised a certain way as kids, me and my three sisters. And the mantra was, you got time to lean, you got time to clean. We had to be on it, up at 5, doing this and doing that and the other. So we were malformed in a way that we thought that's how we had to be coming up. I was deformed because my parents were from the South, deep South, Bible Belt South. Emphasis on the belt. You know what I'm saying? So it was spare the rod, spoil the child, right? So I thought that's how you were supposed to raise your children too. I had that deformed mentality of that. And then I went into the service following my father's footsteps. And I witnessed my first suicide at 17 years old. And when the drill instructor came into our barracks and removed the body, took the body away, he came back in there and he just shouted us all down. That young man was weak. He would have never made it in our military. This is why you're here, he's not, X, Y, and Z. And I conformed to that mentality, to that behavior for 50 years until I lost my son. And that transformed me as a human being, to be more empathetic, to be more active in my listening, to be more understanding of people. So when you ask the question about mental wealth, we have to get to a point where we are transformed first. Whenever that occurs, I don't know when that occurs, it might have occurred already. But until you get to that transformation stage, it doesn't matter the amount of wealth you have. Nothing's gonna change.
Yeah. Talking about transformation, that's powerful. Yeah. Francesca, talking about transformation, I love the concept of a workbook. First of all, I'm gonna steal that from you. I'm gonna try to do my own workbook. The idea of actually having practical steps, right? Because I talk to a lot of parents in the work that I do. And the one thing that all parents in here can agree is that kids don't come with instruction manuals, right? This workbook feels like it's a kind of an instruction manual, at least on how to start the process of gaining mental wealth. Tell us a little about some of the practical steps that we here can leave here today and actually implement to start building that transformed mental wealth in our lives.
That's a really great question. And first of all, I can't wait to buy a workbook one day. But I think the basis of what we can do is walk away knowing that we can have a conversation and we can actually listen. We don't have to talk in the conversation. And that's a big part of the workbooks, is learning how to respond, but also how to listen and understand what someone's saying. And when you do respond with validation, with empathy, with love, with support. I think another thing that we can do and take away today is look someone in the eye when you ask them, how are you? Do it with intention. It's not a greeting. It is not a greeting. When you leave here, every time you say, how are you, make it a point to make eye contact and let that person know you want to hear what they have to say and that they're important and their time matters.
Kalani and then Lily. Kalani, you talked about your work as an educator.
Yeah.
And you gave examples of how those young men and those students transform.
Yeah.
What you see when you're going around, not only Philadelphia, but all your travels, on what we as a community, and more specifically Black boys, since that's something that we've had in common, can do to get to that transformation stage. I mean, you've helped them get there.
Yeah.
What are some things that we can do?
So the first thing that I would say, or one thing that I would say first, right, is that you need a support system. I noticed, and I'm not trying to put myself on any kind of pedestal, but I know that there are some, if you're talking about my teaching experience, I know that there are some young people that had fate not brought us together and I was given the opportunity to engage them. There are some things in their lives that they wouldn't have been able to accomplish, achieve, or grow out of, right? And so I began to recognize myself as a support system, right? And reversing the steps, like being where they were when I was their age, I also realized that when I was their age, there were some things that I was going through and I didn't have a support system for. And it made life a lot harder in those areas, right? And so I began to immediately realize, like, yo, we need each other. As an adult, they needed me. and I needed somebody older, right? And so on and so on and so on. And there was somebody younger than them that may have needed them, right? And so having a support system, I think, is extremely important. If I could, one of my favorite stories that I share whenever this comes up is I had a student who was coming. He wasn't coming to school, and he wasn't going to. And when he did come, he wasn't going to any of his classes. He would just sit in the cafeteria. For whatever reason, he peeked his head in my class one day during a lesson, and he decided that even when it wasn't his turn to be in my class, that he would just sit in there. And I loved him, right? And the teachers would come to me and they'd be like, his name is Joe. The teachers would come to me and they'd be like, what's going on with Joe? Why doesn't he go to any of the classes? But we always find him in yours. And I would be like, I don't even know. I don't know what it was about me that drew him to it, right? But since that was happening, I began to engage him. And I learned that Joe was on drugs.
Rice sticks.
His mom was on drugs. And his dad was gone. And I remember finally talking to him, and he was like, I don't want to be here no more. Get it out. I'm trying to get it out because we got time. We don't have a lot of time. But
Stick it together.
it's still emotional for me. But anyway, he shared that with me. Broke my heart, obviously. So I began to engage him, like, intentionally. Joe got into a situation with another student, and then I get into a fight, got kicked out. So I didn't have access to him. At least I thought. But we stayed in touch. I took Joe to rehab, and he turned his entire life around. He ended up getting off of drugs, found himself, he got his degree, found himself a corporate job, bought a house before I did. The man is solid now. And I know I played a role in that. And so that's what I mean by support system.
Yeah.
We need people to love on us, not just say it. Do it. And I'm talking to anybody here. You have anybody in your life, not just a young person, anybody. You know that there's some gaps in your life that you can fill it. Because we can't do without each other. So, y'all can see I'm passionate about that, but that's why I do what I do.
No, it's important. Yeah. Thank you for that transparency, because as you were sharing that story, I'm thinking about the Joes in my life. How many of us have Joes in our lives? I'm willing to bet you every single person in this room has a Joe somewhere in your life. Because think about how that story started. Joe just popped in. He didn't know Joe was dealing with anything, but Joe showed up. Did Joe ask for help? Was Joe supposed to be there? To a certain extent. Was Joe told to be there?
No.
We all have someone in our lives that is a Joe. that's quiet, that's showing up because the space exists. You are making that space. And so I want to encourage all of you to make sure that you're making that space for the Joes in your lives. Because I'm going to tell you, brother, I was in the very same place. I was in a very, very similar place. Where's Isan at? I texted Isan this morning and told him I'm not doing well. We're all going through something. And so part of the purpose of having this conversation together is to, one, show you that we're all going through something. And it's just like that rainbow outside. It's just a blessing from God that you ain't dealing with the worst of it today. And that you're here, right? You're here. It's a reminder that you're here and you're meant to be here. And so I don't know how much more time I have. I appreciate y'all sticking around, but I want to actually give every single person on this panel an opportunity to share what you feel like. One, what does an opportunity like this present to us? Two, how do we manage the trauma and the stress that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis? Because I regularly have to apologize to my son when we're driving through the city. I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm cussing a lot. I'm sorry, I'm cussing a lot. Like, it's a lot going on. What do we leave here with today? How do we take advantage of this day? And what do you want to leave us with as you're up?
For me, it's the people. I think that there have been so many inspiring presentations that have happened today. And a lot of the people in this room are from right around the corner from us. And having the opportunity to get to know one another and to get to share contact information and to get to be an invitation for us to reach out to one another and to continue to grow this really inspiring community, I think is the reason why these events are so important to me and why I'll keep showing up at them. And so I want to thank everybody for being here tonight, because I think this is the way we continue to, shed light on things that sometimes we cower in shame of, and the more we talk about it, the more we have an opportunity to process and heal as a community.
I think for me, adding to that is also conversation. It's a big word for me because no one talked about it when I was growing up. I needed a conversation, so to be in a room full of people who want to be part of the conversation, whether it's listening, whether it's speaking, being there, being present, I think that's huge. And as far as things we can do, for me, something that really helps is finding moments in my day where I can do something that's meant for me. Maybe it's finding 30 seconds where you can take a deep breath, a minute where you can just stand up and stretch your body or your arms, your legs. Maybe it's 5 minutes calling a friend. I call my younger brother 10 times a day, anytime I have those 5 minutes. Finding small moments throughout your day that you can do something for you can really help getting through those really difficult moments that feel like they won't end.
I think what I want to leave you with and what I take away from this, I think are 3 things. Number 1, it normalizes things. If we talk about them, we're not going through it alone. Saying that is a second thing. I'm somebody with a PhD and a master's degree and all kinds of other postdocs and whatnot. I've also had mental health issues. I have a mother who tried to kill herself. There have been various other things in my life that have been very difficult. So they are helping professionals that are not only trained in evidence-based medicine and approaches that will help you and understand you, but there's also people that have been through this as well. And I think in my profession, or in our profession, I'm also a clinical psychologist, we don't talk about that a lot. And I think that also makes it hard for people to seek help because there's a barrier there, right? You're vulnerable, and there's this person with all these degrees that's supposed to fix you. So I want to leave you with, there's also many of us that are struggling and have been through things. We use these tools on ourselves to help ourselves feel better. So I love the community, I love the normalization, knowing that I'm also not alone. Whatever. What's other things?
2 things real quick. We all have a PhD now.
Oh, whatever.
I'm trying to keep it real. But for real,
Thanks.
For real. I'm leaving here, and I want you to leave here with this, my people. Connection is protection. And when we come together and we connect like we did today, you asked the question, my brother, about trauma. Because of a new connection, my sister Haley over here, I can connect with her and find out how to really truly deal with that trauma. Because of my connection with Kimani, we're gonna chop it up after the function here.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Because of my connection with Isan, I'm about to start drinking lemonade again. Connection is protection, right? Your young son here, we've been talking to him all day, and he's been assisting you all day. Connection. The ladies in the back that was helping us with the food today. Connection. Leave here. My dog right here. Okay, you my uncle. You know what we talking about, OG? Connection is protection. That's what we should leave here with today. Don't get disconnected because the event happened today on the 7th of September. Please, stay connected.
I have to, because I remember my third thing that I think is really important and that I leave here with. The resilience that everybody showed here with their performances, making art out of suffering, creating meaning out of suffering. That resilience is inspiring to me. Kalani.
What you guys like? What do I leave you with? I think the most important thing I can leave anybody with is could be wrapped up in one word, and that's love.
Amen.
Walk in it. It's important.
Yes.
Every single one of us needs it like water.
Yes.
All right. Put your hands together for our panelists. Thanks,